All right, good morning, Lakeview. Good morning. Cold day out there. Glad you guys braved the snow. I know my car was covered in ice this morning, so I guess it sort of rained and froze in the middle of the night. But glad you all made it, and those who are watching at home, we're continuing our study of Genesis. We're on week 10. We're going to be covering, Jacob wrestling with God, and so. Okay, this thing doesn't want to work again. Nope, there it goes. All right, so attempts in modern research to decode Genesis stories like allegories in order to reconstruct ancient histories are projections which miss the semantics inherent to those traditions. So Bloom here is talking about how they're trying to figure out like all the sources, like why they're the same stories repeated. They think there's different traditions, and there isn't an actual point to the repeating stories. So we're covering chapters 32 through 36 today. Again, here's my bibliography. My slides are available from Ray, or you can ask me and I can give them to you. So our objective today is, what does it mean to struggle with God? Right? We're going to learn about the power of forgiveness and the difference between justice and vengeance. So, this is right after Jacob and Laban part, and he is now entering into Canaan, and he camps at this place, and there the angels of God meet Jacob, and he names the place Mahanaim, which means two camps, because God camps here. So there is an army of angels that are now camping where Jacob is camping in Canaan, because, as we see, he's about to meet his brother Esau. So Jacob sends messengers to his brother Esau living in Seir, which is later called Edom, and hopes to find favor in his brother's eyes. Esau is coming to meet his brother with 400 men, which terrifies Jacob. So he divides his caravan into two camps, so if Esau destroys one, the other one will survive, right? Then Jacob prays to the God of Abraham and Isaac to allow him to return to Canaan safely, that I may do good. Remember, last week, Jacob had a meeting with God at Bethel, and there, God said, I will bring you back to Canaan. And Jacob said, if you do that, I will follow you faithfully all the rest of my days. So we're about to reach the culmination of that promise, which is probably why there's some angels camping around here. Right? So Jacob is humble in his prayer, saying he is unworthy of God's steadfast love. Yet God blessed Jacob, who went from having only a walking staff to being rich in family and good. So when he fled his brother, originally, that's all he had, just a staff and his, cloak, and now he's got herds and a family and servants. So he gathers up 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes, 20 rams, 30 milking camels and their calves, 40 cows, and 10 bulls as a gift for Esau. He instructs his servants to go ahead and bribe Esau and blunt his anger. Jacob hopes his brother will accept him, so he's looking for reconciliation. Then Jacob takes his wives, concubines, and 11 sons across the Jabbok River to be safe. Then he's alone, so he sends the other half of his caravan across the river. So he sends one part ahead to meet with his brother, and then he sends his family across the river so that they have a chance to flee if things do go bad. And he is going to meet his brother alone. So Jacob was left alone, and he struggled with a man until daybreak. Well, that's interesting. He just there, it's the middle of the night, and suddenly he's just wrestling with a guy, right? When the man realized that he hadn't yet won the struggle, he entered the socket of Jacob's thigh, dislocating it as he wrestled with him. So that's a very painful injury, but Jacob still won't let go. And the man said, let me go, because the dawn has come. I won't let you go, Jacob replied, unless you bless me. Jacob really wants to be blessed by this man that he's just suddenly wrestling with. Right? Then the man asked him, what's your name? Jacob, he responded. Your name won't be Jacob anymore, the man replied, but Israel, because you exerted yourself against both God and man, and you've emerged victorious. So this is why Jacob is wanting that blessing so bad. He is wrestling with God. And God is warning him the dawn is coming, because maybe that means he might see God's face, and that might be bad. They're in the dark now, so he's kind of protected from that. But please, Jacob inquired, tell me your name. But he asked, why are you asking about my name? And he blessed Jacob there. So Jacob is a good inclination about this, but he wants confirmation. Still, the man blesses Jacob, or God blessed Jacob, as we see in the next line. Jacob would later call the place Peniel, because I saw God face to face, but my life was spared. So the text is explicit. He wrestled with God here, and he didn't win, but he was so stubborn that he didn't relent. He wanted that blessing from God. He showed how much he wanted to be blessed by God. He suffered for it. So the sun was rising above Jacob as he crossed over from Peniel, limping due to his wounded thigh. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the hip tendon that connects to the thigh socket, because he had injured the socket of the thigh where the tendon connected to Jacob's hip. So that's a weird verse. That's probably something that got added much later in the Genesis to sort of explain this custom that's not even mentioned in any of the laws. But apparently it's a custom that had developed at some point because of this, that they don't eat that tendon. So what do you think Jacob wrestled with God? I gave my inclination. He wants the blessing, but that's a pretty bold thing to do. And another question that's not on here was like, do you ever wrestle with God?
Probably not physically, but we've all wrestled, I believe, at some point.
Not physically, but we have wrestled, spiritually. Yeah, we question things, right? There was that plane that crashed in Philadelphia with the little girl, right? Just the other day. That's a pretty awful thing that happened. Do you think God has a problem with us wrestling with him? No? I don't think he does. I think he wants us to. Yes, sorry, I saw a hand. Yeah, so sometimes wrestling with God is us being stubborn and not doing what he wants us to do. And we can suffer for that. Yes, Miss Jackie?
I think God would rather have us wrestle with him than ignore him.
God would rather have us wrestle with him than ignore him, because it's a relationship he wants with us. And if you don't tell your feelings to the other person, you don't engage in that dialogue, then you're not going to resolve it. It's just going to fester in you, right? You don't want that. So, take it to God, even if you're angry, it's okay.
Trying to understand what God wanted for him is a way of wrestling with God.
Yeah, trying to understand what God wants for him.
Yeah, and I think we do it all the time, sometimes without realizing it.
Yeah, we do wrestle with God all the time. We don't understand what's going on in our lives, and we question it. Yeah, and we question what's happening.
This way.
Yeah. Anyone else? All right. So let's just get into kind of what Israel means. So this is according to John Goldengay, his Genesis Baker commentary. The typical significance given to a new name is different from the name's inherent meaning. There are several possibilities regarding the inherent meaning of Yisrael. In itself would imply God will rule, or may God rule, like when he changes Sarah's name, or perhaps God will exert himself, or may God exert himself. It's another way you can translate Yisrael. But the adversary words make Jacob the subject of the verb. So the fight between the adversary and Jacob has illustrated not only the relationship between Jacob and a supernatural adversary, but also the relationship between Jacob and human adversaries such as Esau and Laban. So that comparison is in the text, right? And it's in verse 28 where he says, "But Israel, because you exerted yourself against both God and men, you've emerged victorious." So that struggle with both people and with God is why his name is changed. So for the audience, it encapsulates something of Israel's life and destiny. Oh yeah, because I put the verse up there. I didn't have to go back. Yeah, so this is kind of like what Israel's destiny is going to be. They're going to struggle with the nations. They're going to struggle with enemies, but they're also going to struggle in their relationship with God. It's not going to be an easy thing, right? Because there's going to be pride, there's going to be, desires, there's going to be selfishness that they're going to have, and it's all going to, come to a boil, right, as we get into the divided kingdoms and the conquest and stuff.
We don't necessarily wrestle with God physically. We do so mentally.
Yes, we wrestle with God,
Understand
God mentally.
what He wants of us.
Yeah, what he wants of us, that's a struggle, right? Understanding what God wants of us. That's why we need to study the Word. So, and Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the 2 female servants. He put the servants with their children in front. So these are the children of Bilhah and the other concubine, I'm blanking on her name right now, in the front, then Leah with her children, and Rachel and Joseph last of all. So this is our first time where Joseph has shown favoritism. He is put at the very back to be protected, and all his brothers are between him and the enemy. So this is the start of that contentious relationship. Then he himself went out before them, bowing to the ground 7 times until he came near his brother. And you see how many times he bows. That's a lot of prostration, right? And you know what? Peter once asked Jesus how often you need to forgive someone. And Peter was like, is 7 times enough? And this is Jacob asking for forgiveness 7 times. This is what Peter's kind of referencing. But then Jesus says, what? 77 times, right? Or as many times as it takes is the other way of saying that. So, but Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. It's been 20 years since these brothers parted. And as you can see, Esau has had a very big change of heart. Something has happened to Esau in these last 20 years. He's changed. He's forgotten his anger. He is happy to see his brother. And this is what Jacob was dreading so much, and then instead, it's a happy moment, right? And when Esau lifted up his eyes and saw the women and children, he said, who are these with you? Jacob said, the children whom God graciously given your servant. So Jacob is putting himself under Esau's power. He's submitting to his older brother here, even though it was, told that the relationship would be the other way around, and it will be in Israel's future. But right now, Jacob is the person that wronged his brother, and so he is being contrite here. Then the servants drew near, they and their children, and bowed down. Leah likewise and her children drew near and bowed down, and last Joseph and Rachel drew near, and they bowed down. Esau said, what do you mean by all this company that I met? Jacob answered, to find favor in the sight of my Lord. So he's referring to the servants that went ahead with all the animals, so that's what Esau's talking about. But Esau said, I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself. So Esau doesn't even want the bribe. He's just happy to see his brother. Jacob said, no, please, if I have found favor in your sight, then accept my present from my hand, for I have seen your face, which is like seeing the face of God, and you have accepted me. Last night he wrestled with God, and now here he is with his brother, and, Jacob is going to do anything to earn back his brother's, forgiveness, and he's received it, and it's like being blessed by God in his mind. So please accept my blessing that is brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough. Thus he urged him, and he took it. So Esau does in the end accept the gift. So what lessons can we draw from Esau's actions, right? We know Jacob's side of the story, but how do you think we should model ourselves after Esau here? Grow a beard? He probably had a big beard. He was a hairy guy. All right. Yes? Yeah, we forgive openly, without conditions. Esau doesn't say, he rejects the bribe, right? He just wants to reconcile with his brother. And he has every right to be angry. He was cheated out of so much.
Sometimes time just heals.
Yeah. Time heals to him all wounds. It's been 20 years. That's a long time to miss your brother and to forgive that hurt of that day. Yeah. I mean, who knows what influence Isaac and Rebekah might have had. We saw earlier that Esau was trying to win back his parents' affection after this event by marrying within their clan instead of Canaanite girls. So there might be something there. So Esau and Jacob part ways. So Esau wishes Jacob well, and they haggle over whether Jacob will accompany Esau back to Seir, which is outside of Canaan, by the way. So this is outside the Promised Land. We see this with all of Abraham's extra sons, and with Esau, they all leave the Promised Land. So there's no question of who's supposed to get it in the family. It's, Jacob, right? Anyways, so they haggle about that, but in the end they part. There's a lot of excuses Jacob makes to get out of it. It's like that thing where someone invites you to do something you really don't want to do it, and you're just trying to find like the nicest way to get out of it. It's kind of what Jacob's doing here. So Jacob arrives at Sukkoth, which is making booths. That's the festival of Sukkoth, right? The festival of Tabernacle. And there he builds a house and erects booths or tents. So it's probably not a house like a permanent house, but this is where he decided to live for a while. And then again, he moves on and settles near Shechem's town. Usually the Bible calls it Shechem, but then the name of the town's leader is also Shechem. And Shechem's like a big city, and so there's some people think this is really, it's what they're talking about is this is the town where Shechem lives, and its name hasn't really been remembered. It's just being identified as a town of the local chieftain. The Septuagint actually calls the town Salem, not Shechem. And this is not Jerusalem, but just another place that means peace, because in Genesis 34:21 says, "These men are at peace with us. Let them dwell in the land and trade in it, for behold, the land is large enough for them." So Jacob purchases land from Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 kesta, which is an unknown monetary amount. Usually it's shekels in Genesis, but for some reason we have this monetary amount called kesta. He builds an altar and calls it El Elhoi Israel. God is the God of Israel. And then we come to this story. This is in the chiastic structure. This is opposite the tale of Isaac and Rebekah with Abimelech, where Rebekah is in danger of being kidnapped like this. So anyways, Dinah makes friends with the woman of Shechem's town and draws the eyes of Hazor's son Shechem. He seizes her and rapes her. And while there's no Hebrew word for rape, they have words that let you know it's rape. The Hebrew's clear, he defiled her, and in a spiritual way too. It's not just a physical violation. It uses the same language that Absalom violates Tamar. So Leviticus 18:24-25 says, "Do not make yourselves unclean by any of these things, for by all these the nations I am driving out before you have become unclean, and the land became unclean, so that I punished its iniquity, and the land vomited out its inhabitants." So this is one of the ways the Canaanites defile the land, because they have defiled a member of Israel. And this is a practice that seems just the way they do business, right? Shechem tells, sorry, did someone say something? Okay. Shechem tells Dinah he loves her and desires to marry her. After all, she's been despoiled by him, right? She's, what man's going to want to marry her now? So we're seeing again the Canaanite practice that's been hinted at in Rebekah's story. Jacob hears what happens, but his sons are out in the field, so he holds his tongue, right? He's before this father and his son. There's probably other guys there, and he's alone, so he's not stupid, right? So Hamor speaks with Jacob, but Dinah's brothers have now returned. They are angry because Shechem had done an outrageous thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, for such a thing must not be done. So notice how they say, by doing this in Israel, they're already considering this, the promised land, that this is their land given to them by God now. So this was done on Israel's soil to Jacob's daughter. So the brothers, as I said, the brothers see this as their land. Shechem wants to marry Dinah, though, and he will pay any price. to Hamor, his father, stealing brides is just how the world works. So the brothers come up with a scheme, tricksters like their father. They say that their sister can only marry a circumcised man. Every man in Shechem's town must be circumcised or no wedding. And Hamor and Shechem are pleased. It's a cheap price, right? They don't have to pay any gold or silver or precious gemstones. Just this little act, right? A couple days and you'll be back to, bright as rain. So they do not delay because Shechem loves Dinah, right? Shechem tells his people to circumcise themselves. On day 3, while the men are still recovering, Simeon and Levi, who are the sons of Leah and they're the full brothers of Dinah, kill Hamor and Shechem and all the men. Shechem's town is probably not that big as opposed to the city of Shechem. Then the other sons of Jacob loot the town, including taking the wives and children, so there's some irony there. But this is how the world worked back then. You looted a city and you took the women and children as yours to do with as you pleased. And this is, again, a lot of the Old Testament is not, proscriptive, it's descriptive. So Jacob is angry at Simeon and Levi. This will cause consequences with the Canaanites and the Perizzites. Jacob does not have the men to war with him if they want vengeance. His sons protest that their sister was treated like a whore. In fact, Targum Neophiti has a long passage defending their actions, so later rabbis seem to think are on the side of the brothers here. However, Jacob in 49, 5-7 remembers this incident and strips firstborn rights from the pair. So this is why the inheritance eventually goes to Judah, because Reuben loses it in a different manner. So, do you think Simeon's and Levi's actions were justice or vengeance? In their eyes, it was justice, but the way they went about it was vengeance. It wasn't through any sort of law. And they punished far more people, right? Yes, Dan. Yeah, the way they plotted it. Yeah. Dan?
You gotta weigh heavily that this is not justice. I'm not even sure I would dignify it as vengeance. This is just really, really evil. I'm not on the same page with Targum Neophiti. Simeon and Levi did something really, really bad.
Yes, they absolutely did. They broke an agreement, right? They brokered a marriage contract. This is, they could have demanded some sort of recompensation, denied Dinah having to marry this guy, but no, that's not what they did at all. Yeah. So this is what we have to remember, right? Vengeance is the Lord's. We're not supposed to seek it out. And there are consequences because Jacob is scared that the other surrounding towns are going to go at them. And as we're going to see, the Lord has to stop those other towns from actually going after them. So this could have been really bad for Israel. They could have just been wiped out because of what Simeon and Levi did. So it's also something to remember. When you seek vengeance, there's always unexpected consequences. So again, we see once more living with the Canaanites has caused problems with Abraham's family. God tells Jacob to go to Bethel. After all, it's no longer safe here, and make an altar to God. This is again where God appeared when Jacob fled. So it's a holy place where God dwells. In fact, Bethel means house of God. Before going, Jacob needs to put away foreign gods. They did just loot Shechem of all its terebinths and earrings. And I really couldn't find why the earrings are mentioned as being connected with pagan idolatry, but there must be some Canaanite practice that the men wore earrings for their gods or something. And he needs to purify himself. Shechem has defiled Israel by raping Dinah, and Canaanites defile God by worshiping idols. So Israel must become clean. So outside of the clean animals in the ark, Genesis 34 and 35 are the only places that mention defiling and purifying in the book. We'll talk about a lot of this coming up in Leviticus, but this is the only time Genesis really touches on the matter. So on the way, Rebekah's nurse, Deborah, died and is buried beneath an oak tree. So this kind of comes out of nowhere. Why is Rebekah's nurse with Jacob? Or, maybe Deborah was sent to fetch Jacob. back when the time had come, or maybe he had been living with Jacob since Rebekah's death, or maybe they just came across her grave. Either way, they called the spot Alon Bakuth, the Oak of Weeping. Perhaps Jacob was close with Deborah. She must have been like an aunt to him as he grew up, right? So we just have this little interlude here. Genesis is just talking about, we don't actually ever get a mention of Rebekah's death. We only get a mention that she's buried in Machpelah. Yes, Dan?
So when I read this, it gives me the thought that Deborah must have come with Jacob and the others when they left Laban. Deborah apparently was with Laban, and that adds credibility to Jacob's leading. If even Deborah would leave Laban to go with Jacob.
I don't know if we can say that for sure. The last we heard of Deborah, she was sent with Rebekah to go marry Jacob, and then suddenly she's dead here. So it's hard to really say how she ended up in Jacob's party. But I think the key is the Oak of Weeping. Jacob does mourn her, so I think there is a relation. There's a family relationship there. So it was important enough for Moses to include this, and for God to want us to just remember that it's okay to grieve. So God appeared again to Jacob after he had arrived from Paddan Aram and blessed him. Then God told him, "Your name is Jacob no longer. You are to be called Jacob. Instead, your name will be Israel." So God called his name Israel and also told him, "I am God Almighty. You are to be fruitful and multiply. You'll become a nation, in fact, an assembly of nations. Kings will come from you, and they'll emerge from your loins." Now, as far as the land that I gave to Abraham and Isaac, I'm giving it to you and to your descendants who come after you. I'm giving the land to you. So Jacob has now actually returned to Canaan. So his last encounter with God wasn't really in Canaan yet, but now he's in Canaan proper. And so God is reiterating the covenant. They made the promise, he'll be faithful. Now God is saying, what I gave to your father and your grandfather, I'm giving to you. So with God, Jacob goes up to a high place and builds a pillar of stone. Again, these are the same pillar of stones that Leviticus is later going to outlaw because they're too associated with a local religion, but right now it's okay that Jacob does this. He pours out a drink offering and names the place Bethel. It's a departure from other such covenant meetings because of the pouring out of the drink offering. We don't see that in any other covenant meetings that happen. Later, they set out from Bethel. While still a long way from Ephrath, Rachel started to have trouble giving birth. While she was suffering due to her difficult labor, the midwife told her, "Don't fear, you're going to have another son." How does the midwife know she's going to have another son? That's the first question I had. Because the child is not born yet, but she's like, "You're going to have a son." Yes? What's that?
It's a breech birth, feet first.
It's very possible it is a breech birth. And so the midwife would have been trying to turn the baby. She clearly successfully turned the baby because it is delivered, if it is a breech birth.
Breech birth, you can tell when it's gender before the baby's all the way born.
Oh, can you? I didn't know that. Okay.
Comes up bottom first.
Okay. Well, there you go. That answered the question. Thanks, Dan. So just before she died, Rachel called her son Ben-Oni, but his father Jacob named him Benjamin. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, also known as Bethlehem. Jacob erected a pillar over her grave, and that pillar stands over Rachel's grave to this day. So Rachel doesn't get buried with Jacob. Leah actually is going to get buried next to Jacob. That's just a very interesting thing. So here's the meaning of what these two names mean. Ben-Oni means son of my sorrow or son of my strength, which seemed to be completely different meanings, but I guess the Hebrew has some flexibility there. While Benjamin means son of the right hand. So why would Rachel name her son Ben-Oni?
Usually thought that it was son by sorrow. She's dying. She's
Yeah.
in great pain. So he's the son that brought her this great pain.
Yeah, she is the son that brings her this great pain, yeah.
And son of the right hand is often interpreted as son of my old age. And
Okay. He is this, true that Ben is the one that will be taking care of Jacob in his old age. I think son of my strength is an interesting way it could be translated. Because, this is what Rachel wants. She wanted to have sons, and she dies bringing her second one into the world, which is sadly a very common thing that happened to women. Yeah. All right. Well, and now we have the death of Isaac, so people are just dying left and right in this story now. So Israel pitched his tent beyond the tower of Adar, which just means the flock tower. It's like a tower that shepherds would build so they could get up there and keep an eye on their sheep as they spread out over the field. There, Reuben lay with Bilhah, and Israel heard about it. Once more, Bilhah has no agency. Laban gives her to Rachel, Rachel gives her to Jacob, and now Reuben takes her for himself. And in fact, in 49:34, we see Jacob remembers this, and Reuben loses his firstborn rights. So this is why the firstborn son doesn't get the inheritance. When we just saw was, the next two sons don't get their inheritance. So it's up to Judah not to mess up now. Anyways, we have a recap of Jacob's 12 sons and their mothers. Then Jacob goes to Mamre, which is aka Kiriath Arba, modern-day Hebron, where Isaac is living. There Isaac dies full of time, as opposed to Abraham, who was just full. Only Jacob and Isaac are described as dying full of time in the Bible. Both men were completely satisfied with their lives when they died. Isaac is buried by Esau and Jacob in Machpelah besides Rebekah, though we learn this later, I believe when Jacob's buried, that we learn his mother's actually there. I've always thought it was weird we have no mention of Rebekah dying, and then it's very interesting. I'm not sure what's up with that. So, what does Reuben sleep with his father's concubine? He's what?
Because he's a moron.
He's a moron, yeah. I think there's a bit more to it. Yes, Dan?
They would have understood this as a bid to take control of the family before Jacob actually died. It's kind of asserting that Jacob can no longer lead this family, can no longer protect his wife. I'm the new big dog on campus. So it's an act of arrogance. There's nothing else said about a later relationship between Bilhah and either Reuben or Jacob. So we don't see this as something that continued. It appears to be just an act of trying to gain power.
Yeah, so Dan's is correct. This is an ancient Near East practice where to show that you're now the one in charge, you would take the king's wives and publicly have sex with them. We see Absalom, I believe, does this. Yeah, he does this with his father's wives. So that's just the same thing. I think what Ham was doing with Noah's wife back then, it's the same thing. He's trying to assert dominance. And his father remembers this. And I don't think it worked out for Reuben, because clearly Jacob, he doesn't take power. Jacob clearly is still in charge. And I think this goes to explain Reuben's actions later on with Joseph, when we get to Joseph's story, because Reuben is the one that doesn't want to murder him. In fact, he's the one trying to get him out of the situation. So I think there is something that this failed, and now Reuben's trying to get back in his dad's good graces by saving his favorite son. But that will be for next week. So lastly, there's a chapter just covering Esau's descendants. We're backtracking again the timeline. Here his wives are listed as Ada, daughter of Elon the Hittite, Oholibamah, the daughter of Anna, the daughter of Zebeon the Hivite, and Basemath, Ishmael's daughter, the sister of Nebaioth. This is not the same list that we get in 26:34-35 or in 28:6-9. They're Judith, daughter of Beriah, a Hittite, and Basmet, daughter of Elon the Hittite, and Mahalat, sister of Nebaioth, the Ishmaelite. So the sister's name is similar, and there's some other names there. It's a very, very weird thing here. Moses seems to be unconcerned by the names of these women. He is concerned by their racial identity. We have two Canaanite women, as we see as a narrative, fearing to marrying with than marrying within the clan of Terah as Isaac and Jacob do. Remember, this is written for the Israelites before the conquest. This is kind of serving as a warning for when they settle into the promised land that, marrying the local women is not going to be good because you need to be set apart from them. That's the whole point of all the 619 laws that they're given in the Torah, to set them apart. So Esau then takes his wife's children, possessions to move to Seir, or Edom. He has left the promised land like Ishmael. He is not a part of the main Abrahamic family. Then we see how Esau's descendants come to be chiefs and then kings of Edom before Israel ever had kings. There were kings in Edom. So God has still not forgotten his promise for Abraham's sons to prosper and to become many nations. And so this is just a reiteration of that. And also, Esau, the people of Edom are called Israel's brothers in Deuteronomy. So they're unlike the Ishmaelites, the Edomites are actually called brothers because they are full-blood brothers of Jacob, right? Esau is. So, do we have any other comments or questions or things anyone would like to discuss? We still have a few minutes. Oh, okay. Well, I guess we'll just be done early today. We'll be covering chapters 37 through 40, which will be Joseph getting, his brothers selling him off into slavery and the Judah-Tamar incident. So let's end with a prayer. Oh, Dan, did you have a comment?
Just thinking about the names not matching there, and yet Moses is not concerned about the names. Neither were the editors that followed after Moses, Samuel, Ezra, those guys. It sounds like they have multiple names,
It's possible.
just like Abram.
People do, yeah, people's names do change, yeah. So that is a possible explanation for why they have different names. It's an interesting, weird quirk in Genesis.
Did you see what any of those names meant?
I didn't look up their names. I can see what we can find out. It's possible we just don't know what they mean because they're probably Canaanite names. But here, let me get logo stuff and we'll take a look.
That would be interesting. I think there's so much meaning in the names. When we see Hagar, I think she's the same as Keturah. Meaning of those two
They have completely different names. Hagar means like servant and Keturah means incense or spice.
Yeah, well, Hagar means runaway,
Yeah.
and Keturah means bonded in love. It's the fragrance of love. She's moved from a runaway slave to one bonded in love with that change in name.
Maybe.
So I think the name changes. If these names here of the wives of Esau have changed, it would be interesting to see what the meaning was.
So Ada means ornament. So the first wife name means ornament. So that's the second name we're given in chapter 36. So let's see what Olabima means. Tent of the high place is what her name means. And let me find them. Here's Ishmael's daughter. Basma name possibly means perfume, but that is in doubt. Let me look up their original names in chapter 26. So Judith is the name that Ada has originally. It's not really, they don't seem to know what that name means. So I don't know. I think they just have pretty standard names for women, it seems. And the original name for Ishmael's daughter was Mahaleth, which means nothing, although she was also a granddaughter of David, has that name. Well, if anyone else has any other topics.
One other thing about Judith, I think that's the name that the Old Testament auxiliary books assigned to the wife of Noah. So that might be a family name.
I don't remember what. There's like 2 different names the Jews have for Noah's wife. So one of them does think it's Lamech's daughter from Genesis 4. But I know there's another name out there for her too. Any other comments? All right, well, let's just end with a prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for this time for us to gather together and just watch over us as we have to drive home through the snow that's accumulating now. And just so be with everyone that's here and be with everyone out there who's driving through inclement weather, Lord. And just let your word resonate in our hearts, Lord, and be with us as we go out in our daily walk, Lord. And just in your name, amen.